I'd like to call this special meeting of the Great Island Advisory Committee to order on Wednesday, July 9th at 7:02 p.m. It's a virtual meeting only. I'd like to start by thanking everyone for being here. Tonight, we're in the final stretch of the master plan, and I really appreciate all the time and effort that everyone has put into it. It really shows, and it's really appreciated. So before we jump into the presentation, a couple of quick updates. First, you'll notice from the agenda that the early events policy isn't on it. That's intentional. Our focus for the next 2 weeks is getting the master plan finalized. That said, we have made solid progress on other fronts. On Monday, the Board of Selectmen approved both the furniture policy and the online store. The furniture recommendation now goes to the Board of Finance, and I believe it'll be on their Tuesday agenda. And we expect the online store to go live mid to late next week. So we'll post that link and launch date on the GIAC website when it's ready. We've also had some good discussions over the past few meetings around the early use of the property. The ideas that came out of that work on the draft of the early events policy will be made available to the Board of Selectmen, who will take it up at a future meeting. That discussion will include an opportunity for public comment before any formal action is taken. Quick update on 23A. The contractor got started this week installing silt fencing, tree protection, and silt sacks for catch basins. The property is still open during regular hours during this period. Full construction is expected to start July 21st that week or July 28th. Once that project starts, that construction starts, the property will then be open Monday through Friday from 4 p.m. to dusk, and on the weekends, the regular hours, dawn to dusk. And we'll post any changes to this. So right now it's open to the public, regular hours. But when that changes for the full construction, we'll post that on the website as soon as we possibly can. And finally, for all the bird lovers out there, a few of our local bird watchers were lucky enough to spot the baby eaglet and even got a couple of great photos. So it's really exciting to see that the nest is active again this year. So congratulations, Great Island. That's great news. Okay, next is public comment. Michelle, do we have anybody that has public comment? If you do, could you raise your hand and Michelle will let you in? You see anyone, Michelle?
I don't see anyone right now.
Okay. Okay. I'll give it 1 minute. All right. Seeing no public comment, we'll go right into the Reed Hilderbrand Master Plan Draft presentation. Becca?
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you everyone who has contributed. I know we do have people from the public on the Zoom. We're really grateful for all the attention, and then very much to the committee. It's been quite a year we've had working together, and we're thrilled to be at this point. So we thought that today, the most important thing is for us to hear from you all and to make sure that we're able to have discussion about the plan as it stands. There isn't really new content in the plan. It's all work that we've been developing with you this last year, but this is the sort of full package meant to be the kind of summarizing and guiding document for the future of the island. So it's a draft, and we're excited to have the conversation today and then to receive any more sort of feedback over the next several days so that we can actually publish the final document in the coming 10 days or so. So we go to the next slide. We very much with all this effort have sought to understand more carefully what makes the island the place that everybody falls in love with when they go there and when they boat around it from the sound. And we have tried to make sure that as we convert it to a public ground for Darien, that we don't lose all that makes it so charming. Next. And so this is a drawing that George Knight and Gray work in his studio have made to capture the plan and some of the sort of fable-like storytelling, unforgettable life experiences that the island already offers and that we want to make sure it continues to offer going into the future. And part of the idea with the way this map or chart for the island is offered to the community is that it is a very, very detailed portrait of the trees and the buildings and the paths and the coves, but also some of the really remarkable and not found anywhere else kinds of details on the architecture or things like the bird's nests that, and feathers that you might encounter as you explore the island. So our hope is very much to make a poster of this and to use it as an orientation for people when they come onto the island, but also if people become fans the way they may. And, we are excited, right, about the t-shirts and sweatshirts that are now part of the Great Island sort of overall character, that this could be something that also people could potentially take home with them as a poster. So if we go to the next. This is the table of contents and the project team. So it mentions all of the committee members and all of the folks that have made up the design team. And then it outlines the components of the different chapters. Basically, it starts with a kind of overall introduction, a little bit of a summary of the analysis that we've done. It then does a walkthrough of the different parts of the island. And then there's a sort of miniature version of a design toolkit to guide the sort of ongoing support and structures that need to be in place island-wide for the island to become public realm. Then there's a chapter on phasing and basically unrolling of how we understand the evolution of the island. And there's a sense very much in that phasing, right, that certain things we have more confidence in and they're likely to happen close as immediately as possible. And then there are other things where there's still quite a bit of open-ended discussion and partnership and sort of cost balancing to know what exactly the future will hold. At the end of that chapter is a capital cost summary based on that sort of set of phasing plans. And then the last chapter is about what happens going forward and very outline ideas about governance and operations and how all the ongoing care will work. I'd love to stop.
But no, before we leave this page, I hate to do this to myself, but I think I need a demotion. It says Mike Burke, selectman, which I am, chairman, which I am not. I think I'm just a member.
Okay. We will, noted. Thank you. This is a draft. So
I know.
All copy edits and, more substantive things. We want to hear from you about that. So thank you. Are there any, I'll just pause for a moment and see if anyone has anything they want to say up to this point.
Becca, so for tonight, are you going to go through each of these chapters at a high level?
Yeah, I thought I would do that and then sort of pause. But I think because this is the overall outline, I thought it might be useful to pause here.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we'll take a look at those titles over there. But that's the plan for this evening, right?
That is the plan for this evening.
Okay.
Yes. And because the document is so long, we didn't want to do an actual page turn because I think, as we've discussed before, even around the vision plan, which wasn't as detailed as this, it's not a fun way to spend an evening. So it is out in the public, but anyway, are there any questions or comments up to this point? Okay, then we'll keep going. In terms of the sort of intro, this is the welcome. This is basically a summary, right, of the process that we used and some of the understandings that we started with, basically, in terms of the community priorities. And I'm curious if we can maybe go to the next slide, but if anyone has anything that they want to discuss here. I can note, because maybe it's helpful, that the one design principle that has really changed since from the vision plan is the final one, which is really about making sure that there are spaces for community events and gatherings to activate Great Island. And, we have gone through this long process of trying to get the balance right between how we're preserving all the natural attributes of the island, but also how we're making sense of the tremendous architectural legacy and the really big appetite of the community to come here to get together, to picnic, and to celebrate things. Any comments, Monica? Do you have something?
Yeah, I actually have a comment. I appreciate the model, and maybe you don't want this level of comment, Becca, so just let all of us know. But I feel like that could be a smaller picture, and probably we could substitute something different.
Agreed.
Keep that, but maybe not have that be the
Not
main.
quite so big. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Okay, we'll keep going. So this is the next chapter. This is really a summary of the kinds of analysis and some of the findings from that part of our work. Go to the next slide. So we thought it might be worthwhile talking some about the significant structures and the importance of particularly the masonry structures. And one of the things that I feel like might make sense to talk about a little bit this evening altogether is, even though we aren't activating or investing in a number of these structures immediately, that they do form a kind of backbone and a backdrop to the island, and that the commitment to stabilize them and protect them and steward them, even as we don't yet have partners, does feel really important, and so is a sort of foundational idea for this plan. I don't know if it makes sense to talk about that a little bit, and some of the cost consequences for the community going forward, as that commitment is made as part of this plan.
I wonder if, Becca, if, because we don't have the cost in front of us for this, so maybe when we get to that page, we can
come back to it. Yep.
I'm happy to jump in and just make a quick comment that I think we've talked a lot about that already leading up to this meeting, that we understand that the master plan will be delivered with ideas and opportunities going forward, but that largely the look and feel of the property isn't going to change in the immediate future, other than shoring up, doing preventative maintenance to keep the buildings safe and sound. So I feel like we've talked a lot about that leading up to this meeting.
Well, I'll
Anybody
say,
else?
I think it's merits just further discussion as we sit here now, because it's now sort of all put together at once with terms of estimated costs and what RH has put in terms of giving the background and potential futures of of these buildings. So I think as we scroll through and as we get to the the costs, et cetera, it's probably worthy of some continued discussion.
Yeah, I agree that it's worth it. It merits a lot of continuous discussion, Mike. I agree. It's just I don't think we have those numbers tonight, and I don't think but Becca, there's been a bunch of times that the photo of like the corner of the roof of the carriage house that needs to be fixed immediately. There's the inside where the roof ridge meets at the stables, which may have already been repaired. I know that was another one. There's like 4 or 5 things that I think we're waiting on doing that are fairly major, even though they're minor in the grand scheme of things. They're potentially allowing like water into the carriage house, for example, and consider knowing that it's going, even if we put carriage house renovations on early activation or base, then it needs to be fixed before that, I believe, right?
So I think something that will hopefully follow from the adoption of this plan is assessment within even the early access and stabilization recommendations of which things are urgent. To your point, Bruce, like where are there things where we need to really expedite or the costs are just going to escalate, versus where are things where we can take our time, and that is basically a next step.
Okay, great, thanks.
I know that there have been pricing for the stabilization of these structures. Has anybody put any numbers on the annual maintenance cost after they're all stabilized?
So I think that there's a sort of model, and we showed it's not filled out, right? We have basically we have a model down. I think their equations are all set up and the assumptions. I think the question in terms of which things happen when to produce which costs, that's not totally solved. We've run
Who's
a
gonna
couple
fill that
possible
chart in?
solutions, but I think we need to, now I'm going to basically sound like Jim Palin. I feel like we need to have the overall direction before we can fill those out. But we do have the cost model that just inputs aren't solved for. But we do know what the stabilization costs are. And I would say the ongoing operations for the buildings are relatively modest, like they are today if we stabilize them. The costs go up if we don't take care of things.
And Becca, I was just going to simply add to Bruce's comment that we have a provisional triage of the some of the work that needs to be done, and the key step, as you pointed out, is the envelope so that we can arrest future decay.
Hey, Michelle, somebody has hacked into our meeting. Or maybe it's just my screen that has profanity on it.
Yeah. Let me stop sharing.
I think, Michelle, what you need to do is under host tools, or here we can with suspend participant activities, click that button at the bottom there, because they're using whiteboards. if you click host tools, Michelle, and then hit suspend, you want me to do it? Suspend.
I just suspended all participant activities.
Okay, good. And then that allows, I think, the co-hosts to still, like, I just unmuted myself after you did that, and that's why I'm able to talk. But so the co-hosts will still be able to, but then theoretically, now that all of those Zoom tools, like whiteboarding and things like that, are turned off, theoretically,
Great.
we should hopefully prevent.
Thank you, Bruce.
And again, that's my understanding of it, but don't hold me to it. I'm
Totally.
not positive, but I think that's what's going on.
Great. Thank you. It looks like all the other tools for sharing and annotating are disabled. So would you like me to share screen again?
Yeah.
Great.
Yep. Give it a shot.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes. And it's clean.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
George, what were you saying?
Sorry,
funny.
I was just speaking to Bruce's comment about there has been a provisional triage of the various buildings that have been surveyed, and I think there's a decent understanding about those things that have a higher priority and lower priority. I think we've just been, and so you indeed.
Yeah, it looks like all of the tools are disabled, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, apparently my analysis was wrong.
This may just be a connectivity issue. We can hear you, George. So do you want to try again?
Okay.
I don't think it's a connectivity issue though, because it's coming up when you share the screen with stuff across, like pink lines and stuff.
I just opened advanced sharing options for host tools and turned off what I think is the ability to facilitate whiteboards during the meeting, it looks like. So maybe let me try sharing screen one more time.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
Okay, so far so good, Michelle.
Fingers crossed.
take 3, George.
Okay, so I just Bruce, your comment about the variable urgency of a number of repairs across the various buildings. We have a preliminary triage of those items, and have ranked stuff that is most urgent and then less urgent, et cetera. So we have a working assumption about how to start to attack those various issues. Most of which, as you point out, revolve around building envelope and wanting to be sure that we can arrest future degradation from weather.
Okay, are we good with this slide? Anyone else? Okay, Becca.
So we'll go to the next. And I think this is identifying, right, the approach related to how we're going to adapt the buildings, but how it is going to be a slow process. Go to the next slide. It is basically also
Hey, Becca,
about yeah,
can you go back to that one more
sure,
time?
of course.
Yeah, so you have all of the structures circled except for that little guy next to the carriage. I know that's the little house next to the White House, right? Right. So I don't know how you, I'm just thinking that this is a document that's going to be looked at, 10 years from now. And so I'm not sure what you want to do with that little box.
Good question. Why don't we think about it?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, let me think about it. Maybe we'll make a miniature circle for it. I do think yeah, let us think about it. And I don't know, George, if you have a particular instant reaction.
Sorry, understanding that it may be indeed used as part of a play ensemble, I think we probably should identify it as with a circle or a separate circle.
Okay, great.
George, you look like you're there right now in that little cabin.
I am surprised.
Let's go to the next slide. Back to the next slide. Thanks. So this is thinking about the historic circulation network, which we're co-opting right now for basically a recreational circuit for the community. Next. And then this is identifying the basic, what we call landscape character zones that will sort of continue that experience and protect that experience that everybody loves about the island. Now, if we go to the next. So this is the chapter where we go project area by project area, and the idea is that there's a sort of summary and then we can go area by area. I don't know if anyone has specific zones that they really want to talk about, but why don't we go to the next slide? Maybe it's useful to pause for a moment on this overall plan. Okay, if there aren't any specific comments here, I think we can continue to advance. So the overall idea, which we've shared with, I think, everyone before, is that we wanted to organize this kind of experientially area by area. And because the history of the island has sort of different time periods, which, you know, George's assessment back as part of the vision plan was really careful about describing, we also sort of, there are kind of character zones or activity zones that make sense of those almost different micro geographies around the island. And there's a kind of different, a little bit of a different plan for each. Go to next. So once we kind of went through each of those project areas and the plans for those, which we've talked about pretty extensively, there are a set of conditions that apply island-wide. Right. And one of the things that's really important about most places that people love deeply is that they feel like a whole, right? There's some sort of sense of a continuity of experience, even though you experience and discover different things and you're exploring, it's kind of one environment. And so having a bit of a design toolkit is one of the things that really provides that. I think something that is super important about the architectural experience on the island, which is one of the things that was highlighted in that earlier significance report, is that truly one of the magical things about the island is that those stone structures really make a kind of family that you meet and greet as you go around. And I think the coves act that way and the outcrops act that way, and there are a number of attributes that kind of you see in different ways as you walk around. But as we go through the design toolkit, we want to make sure as we make the changes for the island that there's a consistency, and that helps both from like an experiential point of view, but it also really helps from an operations point of view, because if something breaks, you know, basically you have one thing that you need to understand to fix it. And it doesn't really matter where the problem is happening on the island. It's, you know, you have your kit of parts and you can use it. So if we go to the next, something that has come up again and again as a major priority for everyone is to make sure that the pedestrian experience, the walking, strolling, hiking experience is first rate and is really brought forward. And so there's been a lot of attention to think about how that network of paths works, what the different surfaces are to support that. As much as possible, as we've shared, we've been seeking to make things as accessible as possible. And when they can't be accessible because it would require, blasting rock or really making way more paths than anybody feels is right for the island, we've sought to make them barrier free, which is what we call where the slopes might not be as level as they might be to meet accessibility code. But ideally, if you're in a wheelchair or you have but you maybe have some support, you could still maneuver because the surface is smooth and there isn't a trip hazard. We go to the next. This is a slide that we wanted to maybe pause at together this evening, partly because there's been such an animated conversation around site furnishings and amenities, but also around the materials of the paths, and a lot of, I think, really careful consideration and concern that we're doing as much as we can to transform the island from its, for most people who are starting to worry about their footing and maybe have challenges with hearing or sight, the island doesn't feel safe today. And we've heard about that again and again since we started working. And so this is basically the plan to try to make as much of the island as possible really welcoming for most folks. And there's a set of changes that go into that. So right now you can see that upper diagram sort of shows how much of the island, basically the core circulation, even though it feels smooth, it's designed for vehicles, it is not code compliant for pedestrians who have accessibility issues. And so we are really seeking to bring, as we shared before, as close as possible over time, 60% of the island circulation to a level of kind of barrier-free condition. That doesn't mean that there won't be some hiking trails. And I think we've also heard so clearly from you and from the community that having some of that rustic character is important to preserve. I don't know if there's any further discussion here we should have.
Yeah, I mean, I've made comments on this before, but I think, for example, like the darkest of the accessible path is materials only, right? So the area behind the stables going back to the North Causeway is that color. And then the area from the beach house out to the northeast lookout there is also, if I'm seeing it correctly, that where it's currently wood chips. And so is that an example of that's the all year round portion of the bridle path that's shaded that color, as well as the loop there, the lookout loop. And now that's got quite I think you just said about the ADA that it may not meet the ADA like slope requirements, but you're saying it would be, I think you used the term barrier free. So in that case, like getting up that hill to the top of the rock outcrop that looks into Scott's Cove, that would be very difficult for somebody in a wheelchair. Even if someone was being pushed, I think it would be fairly difficult to get them up that slope. But,
yeah, and that, right, you're right, Bruce, but we're gonna be basically in these targeted areas trying to make those key experiences
and that's right. That comes to my point, is that area behind the stables where I think it was Ed Gentile that said, it's, what did you call it, Ed? Bony, I think, or something like that. It's got a lot of rocks in it and stuff. So if we're going to make a elevated boardwalk through that area, I think we have to really weigh, we really have to consider, how much is it costing to do that? What is it doing to change the look and feel of the island in those areas? And when I look at the green shading on the island right now, it's, I mean, I would say at least 60%. I'm not an ADA specialist, and I love the idea of ADA, but I just don't want to at the same time pave the whole island for the sake of making the entire island a sidewalk.
Right. And I think that's really clear direction. And so I think this is something like the 17th version of how we've tried to evolve this to get it as close to basically what I think you're describing, Bruce. So it isn't everywhere, but it is, I think, in terms of the spirit of what we've heard again and again from the community, that it's really, really important to try and make most of the key experiences available to most
Yeah,
people.
I don't disagree with it, but at the same time, I think I've said this before. Also, it's not Central Park in a city of 12 million people. We don't have a budget like that, and in addition to creating these paths, the O&M of maintaining them on an annual basis, repaving them, maintaining them. There are lighting requirements, safety requirements. So I think as a committee and as a town of leaders, I think we need to consider, be careful what you wish for here. And anyway, I'll stop there, but I'm just weighing in on it once again.
Hey, Becca, when I read through this title here, you're making the site safe and accessible. When I think about that, I think about it, sort of making the site safe and accessible to the widest array of visitors where possible and appropriate, because there's no way that we can make everything available to every visitor. I think we want to do it where it's appropriate and probably where it's, efficient from a disruption and cost perspective. Does that make sense, Bruce?
Yeah, and I think, right, and I also think we're trying to say we don't want to do harm, right? So where I think, where there's beautiful ledge and where there are beautiful trees, and there's, we don't want to have to bring things, we don't want to have, we believe in trying not to add more light pollution, right? That's also something that the community has given a lot of voice to. So we definitely are not going to be providing lighting for most of these paths. So I think for the main circuits, for where things are ADA and where there are bathrooms and where it's basically code required, we will be doing that. So we can add a little bit more clarification language. We did have actually a couple of, not just a couple, but we even had a review earlier today with our accessibility consultant to make sure that we are tuning this in alignment with all of those goals. But so we can add even a little bit more careful language on that. It's very helpful.
One final comment. I think it might be helpful to differentiate the vehicular paths, the emergency vehicular paths, or roads, I guess we'll call them, that are obviously ADA. Not obviously. There's that one area that comes over the hill by the greenhouse, right? That's too steep for ADA, but a lot of our roadways in there are ADA or quote unquote barrier free, as you mentioned. So I think the graphic has a ton of green on it, which is great, but it might be helpful to see what is new green versus what is already a roadway.
So that's the difference between what's above and what's below, Bruce. The reality is, even though I think many of us perceive those surfaces to be code compliant, they're not in terms of their slopes. And that was part of the work that we did.
Yes.
Right. With the crowning, I saw, yeah. Existing today, but not necessarily in a future state. In a future state, when we tear up the road to do the utilities portion of the work that needs to be done, when that road is resurfaced, it will come to a ADA type. At least in a full best efforts, except for maybe the hill. And I think we've even talked about taking some of the slope out of the hill, right?
Yeah, there are all sorts of reasons to do that. Yes.
Yeah.
And Lori, you were going to share something.
I just found this chart really powerful, frankly. And I like it as is, that the top showing where we are, those of us who are more or less able-bodied say, oh, well, you can walk around the roads and they're fine. Well, this shows that in fact, they're not. When you see that top chart, it's almost shocking how little currently meets the requirements. And I just think it's very important that we leave this to, the professionals and, to really, guide us on how to make this as accessible, as possible. I mean, it's going to continue to be an area of focus around town. We know that. We've talked about that at other meetings. There's another seminar that's sort of area-wide, the different municipalities the town's going to be hosting in a few weeks, specifically about how making municipal infrastructure accessible. I think we really need to leave this to the professionals to guide us in the best way to do that, so that we don't trip ourselves up, or not indicate that we want to do this in the correct way. And it's a very complex set of state and federal requirements and whatever. So I just want to caution everybody about that, because I think we have to be very cognizant of it. And when you really look at it right now, it shows it's very little is accessible to people.
Just to avoid any confusion that, I'm listening to Bruce, is that dark green that's in the bridle path is not going to be paved. That is mulch or stone dust.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
Yeah, there's different services that can be used to meet accessibility requirements. I mean, even in the playgrounds, the mulch is considered accessible for in terms of qualification. So,
Hey, Becca, going to the mulch in the bridle path area, how wide is that path? The path has to be 36 inches, right?
Yeah, so I think right now the path in the bridle area is variable, and the intention is basically to preserve that historic width, which is cleared and mulched. And it's great that way if you wanted to take a school group or the scouts, or you're walking with your family. It's nice to have it be that full width. We are basically saying that we will have within that probably a 4-foot wide, maybe as wide as 5-foot wide, basically stone dust surface, Monica, that allows folks that basically to go to overlook, because I think those two moments on the island are so spectacular that we do want to enable that. And because that is the annually open part of the northern lobe, it feels really important to basically try to make some changes, but they'll hopefully feel very natural, and not add any additional disturbance, basically, because it's already been disturbed at quite a wide width, because it was part of the bridle or carriageway.
And then just one other quick question. The ADA parking behind the stable, I don't see any green connecting that parking, but I'm guessing that whole area is ADA accessible?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. In the final plan, you're right that we probably would make that accessible. I think we haven't studied just this is yes, thank you. We should make that update. It is surprisingly difficult to make ADA parking because the slope rules are so tight for the parking spaces, and you have to have van accessibility. It gets very complicated, but we will do that, Monica. Thank you.
So, Becca, the definition of accessible path materials only is what we talked earlier about as being barrier-free, but not compliant with ADA slope requirements. Is there a way somebody can actually get to any of the lookouts?
Yes, so I think
Who could be in a wheelchair otherwise?
Yeah, I think
ability
Jeff,
impaired.
this is what you and I had a moment to chat about earlier. I think our intention is very much to do everything we can to make those two moments as available to people who have supportive mobility devices without needing to do massive regrading. So to the extent that we're able to set that intention in this document, that is the goal. But the Bruce's note and the other note that was made about some of the slope challenges, those are real. And in that So, yeah,
The,
sorry.
an area where there are no slope challenges essentially is the back lawn of the main house, which from an ADA perspective would be very natural. That all those green lines there, they're the lighter green. It makes sense that they are, I don't know what surface they're going to be, but they should be fully ADA. And almost, I feel like there should be a rectangle there at the corner, the southeast corner, where it's cleared now. And that's a phenomenal lookout, as equally as good as any of the other ones that have boxes on them now. And so that's definitely a lookout point, especially for ADA.
Yeah, agreed, Bruce. We didn't make it into a special because of exactly what you said. That whole area is largely accessible. So,
Yeah.
If there aren't more comments, we can keep moving.
Just to add one last thing, that is equally true. So if you're saying, okay, the beach house lookout point looks out at the vast expanse of Long Island Sound, Green's Ledge Lighthouse, and Fish Island, and Hay Island, et cetera, right? That is essentially the same view from the backyard of the main house. And then if you argue that the far reach at the end of the spur trail of the northeastern lobe off of the bridle trail is a beautiful view into Scotts Cove and Contentment Island, Delafield Island, Salem Straits, Tokenique, that whole area, you can make the similar point that you've got a very similar, if not same, view from the what's the path around the back of the stable? What are you calling that? The outlook, or the around the, yeah, there where the hand is. What is that path? You've given that a name. I forget the name though. But right to the right of where your hand, or right about where that hand is, maybe even higher, because it's up. That's down low. That's the backyard of the White House right there where hand is. But if you go further left, you're up on the plane, the same plane as the stables is on.
Yeah.
And I think you've got that lookout, and that looks out right out through almost the entirety of Scotts Cove, and provides almost the same view as it does from that far reaching northeast. So from an ADA perspective, at a lot less cost, you're providing like kind and quality, not as much quantity of travelable space. But just as it comes down to planning it for real and figuring out our dollars and cents and all that stuff, just we need to consider those things.
Agreed, basically. I mean, there are so many spectacular moments on the island in terms of vistas. So we'll continue, but I think I feel like it is important that we spend some real time on this part of the conversation, and there are cost consequences for how we do this, and clearly sort of fairness and responsiveness as well. Okay, so the next slide. So now we get into the phasing, and we did want to take a little bit of time together to talk about the phasing. Let's go to the next slide here. This is sort of the summary of the phasing with the costs, and I thought we could potentially pause and share a little on this. And I would just like to say, I'd like to really thank everybody for the care that's gone into trying to get this done with sensitivity and a sense that really the resources of the town need to be marshaled to manage so many different priorities, many of which are really essential to people's well-being and educations and things like this. And so knowing that we have to be really careful, the sense that there is a set of infrastructural improvements that are just necessary to open this up to the public, but that we also want to make sure that some of the spectacular architectural and really fun parts of the island are also supported. There's just been a lot of work to try and get a few of those more, I don't know, really rewarding parts of this plan moved into the earliest kind of phases. And I just want to thank everybody for the hard work that's gone into trying to manage kind of cost and scope to get us to be able to have projects in the base improvements that are more than just stabilization and site work and infrastructure.
Looking at these base improvement projects, I know someone said something in terms of triage, but is there a way to understand a priority to some of these base improvements if you're recommending that some need to be completed before we start letting people on the island, or are these sort of things that you can sort of, that you think can be rolled through when you anticipate our citizens going through some of these spaces? What are the real priorities? I mean, just by way of example, if you look at the estate house and the Great Lawn, it says site work and landscape, $2 to $3 million, building stabilization, $1 million. Does that mean, well, unless that building is stabilized, you can't let people walk around it? Or just, what does that really mean?
Since George is with us, I'm going to let him answer that question.
Sure. I think it's largely to do with securing the envelope against weather, possibly, visitors as well who are trying to get into the structures themselves. But that would be a base minimum to, again, prevent further decay of the buildings due to weather. You all live on the water and know how brutal the conditions are. It's in my mind, it's really, I'm so impressed with the Manor House, for instance, how despite being, I think literally mothballed would be the right term for it, it has managed to hold out for more than 50 years of complete desertion. But I think that there's an investment that must be made to arrest future decay. I think too much time has passed, and the same is true with other buildings. But that's surely the most thorny one because of its scale and its exposure.
And to maybe answer the other part of your question, Mike, which is about sort of how do we assess urgency? I think we have done a little bit of work on that, a little bit of calibration about what really needs to happen quickly. And there are some of these stabilization efforts that we will want to move ahead with briskly, potentially in parallel with the early access work, if we can organize to do that. I think, another example of something like that we would be interested in trying to accelerate is the set of improvements to make that southern causeway pedestrian friendly and pedestrian only. I think as much as possible, if when you come onto the island, everyone feels cared for, whether or not they're coming on foot or on bike or by car, that feels like something that there's some degree of priority around as well. So I think that's basically a little bit of a next step, but we can try and provide a little bit of a provisional assessment, Mike, about that.
And so obviously these are very high level numbers or macro numbers that I'm guessing that there's multiple spreadsheets behind that. These are the sums of, when, for example, D site-wide 21 to 22 million. When do we get to see what makes up that number?
I think the thought in terms of master planning basically is to keep these numbers pretty round and broad, because depending on what the phasing for things are, the numbers shift a little bit, and there is a whole set of approvals that need to happen as we understand more carefully what details are going forward. But I can just share that we have gotten guidance from folks like, from folks in public works about what are the typical details and typical costs and typical depths. And so basically the sort of Darien standards and the standards for typical historic preservation kinds of details, or invasive management, which we know is, for instance, something that will be a part of the future of this project. We have held those typical costs in that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that and appreciate that numbers change and will go up or down, but usually up. And but I think we sooner than later need to understand like what is going into item D, for example. I mean, it makes up 2/3 of the total number of base improvements. We need to look at that and say, okay, I'm guessing utility work is in there with trenching and conduit and wire and pipe and stuff like that.
And it is.
But I'd like to see what the roll up, what's inside of the roll up, so that we can, at least as a committee, understand what it's more clear to understand, okay, beach structures for $500,000 or greenhouse building stabilization for $150,000, but then just site-wide for 21 to 22 million. I think we need to be able to parse that out a bit, a lot more. And I'm not saying that we need to like hold anybody to numbers right now. I just like to, I don't even really, it's not that I don't care about the numbers, but it's the numbers are secondary to me right at this moment in time. I'd like to understand structurally, like a framework of what we're looking at and what we're prioritizing and what we think is going to move the needle for the community, and then sharpen our pencil and say, okay, these are the things that have to happen to accomplish that goal.
And I think, Becca, George, the report that was it RJE did, didn't they prioritize and explain levels of stabilization for all of these buildings? Wasn't that in that report?
Yes, WJE. Yep. They included a triage of the most urgent down to things that could be deferred for longer time.
Right. So maybe we should take another look at that. That report is on the Great Island website. But George, maybe you can pull it and just send it to me, and I'll send it around to the committee.
Sure. Absolutely.
Great.
And to be fair, I'm probably jumping the gun into the post master plan, delivery approval process of what do we do next. But okay, that's just wanted to mention.
Bruce, I'm gonna jump in because on D, I agree. I understood it to be probably utilities and all the conduit and trenching and things of that sort. I also assumed, perhaps wrongly, that some of the paths were built into that number. So now
the paths are, and I think we're not looking at this with a plan for all the phases, but
yeah.
In the phasing diagram that's in the document that is now online, you can see all the component pieces for that. So I think if it is useful for the committee for us to provide a little bit more detail, we can certainly do that. We have wrestled with what's the right level of detail and what's the right level of sort of keeping it high level and directional, because this is really meant to be a guiding document, and not granular. There has been a level of granular thinking to be able to have confidence in something that we believe is in the interest of the community, and is something that ideally you can act relatively fast to start to realize. Because I think one of the things that you all have been clear about, but also the community, is we made this giant purchase when do we get to use it, right? And so trying to understand what is the minimum work that is necessary for everyone to have confidence in the community being there is I would say one of the chief directions to come through in this plan.
Okay, I think it's important for the public to know all of these numbers are sort of high level estimates, although they're based on sort of real assumptions and so forth. So I think that's like the first thing. I think for site wide, for that 21 to 22, to Bruce's point, maybe it makes sense to kind of show a few very broad categories, not because of debate of whether like electric and plumbing should be 4 or 5 or 6 or whether that's the right number. But I think to show to our constituents, hey, we have thought about the site-wide improvements. These are the general categories that they're in. So know that they're baked in here. And that's why I think just being able to show that maybe in a small handful of broad categories might be helpful.
Totally agree, and we're very happy to do that. Any other thoughts or questions about the way that we have organized this now? I think I will just highlight that I think one of the biggest sort of shifts that we have figured out a way, because of all this, truly helpful guidance from many different people in your community, is to be able to find a way to move the Caritas project, that terrace off of the estate house that Dan spoke so compellingly about in our last meeting, and some of the coastal trail work. And then we're even hoping to have a little bit of the space at the stables available to people as part of the basically the earliest phase after early access.
Hey, Becca, it's a nit, but I know the Playhouse does not have building stabilization. I'm sure it's just an omission. My thought was the priority would be that any building that's inhabitable currently would be probably near the top of the list to maintain that status, even if it's stabilized. I don't know if that's the case or not, but I noticed that.
No, that's right, Mark. Thank you. I think good catch. Curious if there's any discussion that makes sense to have about either the near future or the sort of larger bucket of unknown, where we've had the kind of very bulk numbers that we shared before, but because there's so many unknowns there, it almost doesn't make sense to be talking about costs for those. And I guess if there isn't more discussion around this, we could potentially stop sharing the document and just have a general conversation about, where we're headed, and what happens next.
Becca, you don't have any other, in our packet, we had additional slides. Are you sharing any more material tonight?
I think that's basically, I guess we have the governance. Yeah, we should go back. Sorry.
Yeah, and we
Thank
had
you.
the.
Yeah, let's go back. You're totally right. I think somehow I short circuited. I apologize. Thank you.
And Michelle, while Becca's doing that, we did have, I just saw an email that somebody was not allowed into the meeting, and that was probably when we were having our tech difficulties. So we just double check that if anyone is trying to enter, they are allowed to enter the meeting.
I will
Thanks.
check.
Hey, Becca, just maybe one comment, just kind of going into these next few pages.
Yep.
A lot of times we talk about like phase 3, like A, B, and C, which is kind of, now near term and long term. for the user that's picking this up in 6 months or a year and looking at it, do we still need the phase 3, given that phase 1 and phase 2 are, we're not really talking about that in here. So I just wasn't sure if it made sense to maybe just drop the phase 3 and just talk about kind of now, near term and long term.
I like that. I don't know how the rest of I think some of this terminology is almost carryover from the original RFP and contract. So we have been moving toward simpler and simpler language. And I think in general, when you're trying to share something, the simpler and more direct we can be, the better. So I like that idea.
Yeah, I do too. We're used to this, but it doesn't mean that somebody looking at this 5 years from now will it'll make sense.
So just to say, I guess briefly, because I know we've spent a lot of time on this before, but basically the hope is that immediately upon adoption and endorsement of the master plan, there is basically a determination to move forward with this early access phase. And the early access phase is very much meant to enable people to start coming to the island. And also because of the sort of consequence of all of the work that we did, where we really do want to try and keep parking and vehicles off the bulk of the island, this is also meant to represent the majority of the future parking provision for the island, at least in the, let's just say, for the next, 5 to 7 years. I think once other programs are realized and partnerships are determined for those other structures, there will probably be some supplemental provision, but the goal of this early access is to have bathrooms, make it comfortable, be able to orient people, allow for some measure of shelter, and even monitoring of the parking policy and other provisions, and to create access points both to the higher part of the island and the lower part down by the boathouse. I don't know if anyone has any particular thoughts about this, or we could move to the next.
Becca, one question. What is the brown path right down the middle of the F, which is the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's an old historic road, which is really actually a beautiful walk right now. It's very steep. We actually had studied whether or not we could make it into a vehicular access way, and there wasn't a way to do that without hurting the stunning trees that are there, and the slopes are kind of a little bit precipitous, but it is a really beautiful walk, and it's already cleared and leveled.
Okay.
And so the idea is to help have there be a circuit where you can engage that with, without having to walk on asphalt if you want.
Got it. So that's a path. Okay. Thank you.
And it's totally a kind of adaptive reuse situation. Sorry, Monica.
No, I was just going to say on this, I think it's helpful if we have it, even if it's not exact, an estimate on parking spaces and bike parking. Can you add that?
We can do that. Right now, that is, I guess, just summarized on the parking page earlier in the document.
Yep.
Okay.
And basically what it says is 50 to 60 paved spaces, and then another roughly 30 to 40 lawn spaces, and our
overflow.
But we can do that, Monica. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is the base improvements kind of descriptor, and I think, Mark, to your earlier question, this shows the extent of the paths that are part of this, and basically the utilities, the trails, certain code compliance, a set of site-wide vehicular improvements that are really about fire protection and emergency and operational kind of performance and maintenance. The carriage house in the wetlands, a little bit of the improvements related to that overall site-wide envelope and structural stabilization. Um, and then the stables, forecourt, and estate house terraces in the coastal trail. I don't know if there are more questions about this.
So
No,
Rebecca,
I'm just going to
this-
interrupt again. Sorry, Michael. We are getting emails about people still not being able to join the meeting, so I'm not sure.
I
if
just
there-
checked the settings and I was able to, I think when we did the suspend activities, it ended up locking the meeting. And so I just found the control to unlock that. So I see someone I just admitted from the waiting room is now joined.
All right, thank you.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
just to be clear, Monica said, we were having technical difficulties. For the good people that are trying to get in, please know that they weren't our technical difficulties. They were rude, rather unscrupulous person or people who invaded our meeting and were defacing the presentation and trying to distract this group from their purpose and the people from watching. So it was no desire by any of us to exclude people. It was the act of others.
And also, I think it's important to note that it was not locked out at the beginning when public comment was available, and that this meeting and all of our meetings are recorded and available to watch back on demand very quickly. Because I ran the last meeting and Jim Cameron was trying to locate that video file within minutes after the meeting ended. So
Right, and we will upload it. Yep, okay.
Thank you. So just want to make sure that any questions about what is contained in this base improvements phase are heard.
Okay,
Let's
so
move.
with J, the stable forecourt and estate house terraces, obviously that's not the stabilization of the estate house. That's a different figure, right?
That is a different figure. The stabilization of the estate house is part of B under the building envelope and structural stabilization. Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So then the near-term future projects, there are a few, and so in a way we've ended up being pretty selective about these. But the idea that we would commit to renovating the stables so that they can really be opened up for civic and community use, and then the idea that we will find a solution for all the boating and kind of marine interest, but that we just need that continuing study to succeed with that. So those are the near-term future projects.
Hey, Becca, on the base improvements, you have abate hazardous materials, and I'm wondering, is that for the main house? And I know I might have asked this before, but do we need to do abatement in the interior of the main house if we are not opening the main house?
I would love George to talk about that. I've sort of done my best to answer that, but I think George, since you're here, I think it's useful potentially to share some thoughts about
Sure. Monica, I don't think that there would be an obligation to carry out that abatement if indeed the house was not made available to the public, the interior of the house. I think the minute that it becomes available, I think we would need to have taken action, but I don't think that we need to if we're simply attempting to stabilize the envelope.
And then sticking with that question, since I have an expert here, if we wanted to activate the first floor, for instance, would we have to do abatement in the basement or on the second floor?
I think indirectly, I think you probably would, because the mechanical systems, the heating and cooling systems, I think we can think of them as really not functioning, and they would need to be replaced entirely if you wanted to present the building as being occupiable. And I think at that point, you will be, needing to do a lot of construction work in order to make a new system remove the old system and to make the new system feasible.
Okay. So at this point, is it fair to say that the abatement costs are not included on that previous sheet?
That is my understanding. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Why don't we shift to the next slide? So this is the future possibilities, and this is the, in some way, most open-ended slide. There are projects identified here that could move very briskly should some level of partnership or philanthropic funding, I think, come forward. So we know there is, for instance, a lot of excitement about having adventure play and a family shelter. So that could be a very exciting project, for instance, to move ahead with. We've also heard so much interest around the greenhouses and the gardens. Additionally, very easy to move ahead with briskly. And I think it's possible too to imagine that once we start really moving ahead with the Stables project, that there is so much enthusiasm for that, and the vision is so compelling that the whole project could move ahead. But I think it's too early to imagine that, and I think if we're thinking that the town is self-funding much of this work, I think the previous phases are the ones that there's just the deepest level of community consensus around, and so that's what's being put forward.
I think that's a good philosophy. You know, I was wondering about that. I think as we get out into this phase 3, you know, the first 3 phases, I guess we'll use the new terminology. The long-term future is, I think, more disaggregatable depending on interest. And, you know, once we have opportunities to enjoy safe walking with, you know, adequate emergency access, et cetera, then we will perhaps be able to entertain or I'd say generate support for some of these others. And I'll just put my add my voice to those who think that the family shelter and the adventure play area are very important. Maybe not as many kids out there now, but certainly we want to leave something for future generations and develop that sense of attachment to Great Island. You know, that could be a little bit problematic as well if these things are all moving at different velocities, I suppose. But I think it is important to document all these things as aspirational. And it's clear that we're not, you know, issuing bonds or anything yet. But so I like the way it's been presented here.
Any other points that people want to make? I think we can advance if not. So now we get to the next steps and enabling change. And I think if we go to the next slide here, I think something we've tried to be pretty succinct about here, but also clear is what the steps are for starting to realize these different phases. And if we go to the next slide, a little bit of a kind of overview of sound governance for a place like this, and the kind of clarity that for Great Island, for the immediate future, it will be a town-led public space, and that you know, potentially over time that might evolve into some level of partnership with a conservancy or something like that. But as we think about these immediate next phases, the understanding is very much that the town of Darien will be guiding all of that future. And then this is the sort of summary, which we've been sharing for a while now, of how decisions will be made going forward. And I'm curious, Monica, if there's anything you would want to share about this and the next steps. And I think you're muted. I know you're muted. Sorry.
No, I think you've laid out a really a good process here for us, Becca. I think that the decision makers is a good circle, and I think you and your team have done a great job of working on this, and the Great Island Advisory Committee has done an excellent job on shepherding this process. And the next step will be to approve this plan and to recommend it to the Board of Selectmen, who will then take it up.
Quick question, Becca. Under this process that we're looking at here with the town and that group and that circle being the primary decision makers as we contemplate these base improvements, unless we're going to commit, taxpayer dollars, we're going to have to go out, there'll have to be some sort of campaign to help maybe raise some of these capital funds. Do you folks have a recommendation as how a government does that as opposed to a conservancy?
Yeah, there's probably a long form answer to that question, Mike, that I won't provide, and I may not even be the best person to provide that. That's the kind of thing that the James Lima folks are particularly expert at. But
Okay.
I think there's some communities that we work for where they have kind of, I don't know, substantive planning branches within their government, and they've hired a bunch of sort of experts that become the town experts to do that work. And so in those cases, they do the town self-reform. I think in other cases, the idea is that, yeah, you basically maybe do stand up something like a conservancy, and it might just have a part-time staff person, but that person is given a job definition. And one of the parts of that is that they have to fundraise to support the work, and they have to demonstrate success for achieving some of those capital fundraising goals. So I think my sense is that it is an avenue that the town will have to consider about whether or not that is the right thing to do, because I think, as we've all discussed, some of the costs related to the sort of spectacular structures and stewarding that the island merits don't necessarily align with the realities of the community's budget, right? So trying to find a way to support the long-term future of the island, I think, is something that it definitely feels totally feasible for the town to do that alone initially, but that may be the direction that the town goes in the future.
Thank you.
And there are lots of people who would be super excited to be hired to help Darien do that, either within the government or as a kind of companion, not for profit or conservancy.
This is John. If I could say one thing about that. We've had lots of internal discussions about the right governance model for Great Island going forward. We're going to have something. I think the question is when does it get established, and sort of what standing does it have? In other words, what role or oversight capability does it have in terms of making decisions about Great Island, and trying to sit down with folks who might actually be interested in making a substantial financial contribution is probably going to be the best way to get a sense for what they're going to recommend or require in exchange for their financial support. So my thought is that this is something we don't want to prejudge, and that it's probably going to be better for us to take all the options that Reed Hilderbrand has articulated, keep those in the forefront. And as we get through to our implementation phase and start looking at some investments, we'll have these options available to us to structure the Great Island governance in just the right way that meets the needs of the folks who really want to provide substantial financial support.
Well, so for our end, just as we get through the next week, we'll summarize and send to Monica the set of notes in terms of edits that have come out of this conversation. And I think if there are supplemental things that you feel will benefit the document and the process, please do share them by the end of the week. And then we will fold them in and circulate what we hope to be a final draft.
Becca, tell me again when you want the comments.
I think if we could have them by the end of this week, that would be great. I
This week.
know people have already devoted really significant energy and attention. And so hopefully there isn't too much more other than what has come forward. But so if for some reason someone feels really strongly that they need longer than Friday, just let us know. But I would really like to try to close out the edits at the end of this week.
Okay. Okay. So I think are we done, Becca, with your presentation?
I'm done. We can stop. Now we can really stop sharing. Sorry for my early enthusiastic fake ending.
Okay.
But just on behalf of our team, I would really like to thank everyone so much for the sincerity and the professionalism and the dedication to this process. It has been an enormous joy for our team to get to work with you all on this, and we are even more enchanted by the island now than we were when we first set foot on it. So it has been a delight. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank your whole team for all of your work. So does anybody have any further comments for Becca?
Well, we appreciate you letting us try your patience, which sure happened on one or two occasions. Maybe not any more than that, for sure.
Okay, onward. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your evening. Happy summer.
Okay.
And talk to you soon.
Wait, 1 second. I'm sorry. Does anyone have any last comments? Otherwise, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Okay. Jim moves and Mike seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
If you're not, okay. Terrific. Unanimous. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.